After well over 100 hours testing Samsung's brand new Galaxy Z Fold 7 against the Fold 6, 5, and 4 in over a dozen different categories, I finally have a complete guide on whether or not the Fold 7 is worth the upgrade, and it's a lot more complicated than you might think. Let's start with the physical differences because there's actually a ton of differences between these generations. And while some of them might seem pretty minor, like the fact that the flash keeps moving around, this is actually a pretty big change because since Samsung moved the flash in between these two cameras now and a little bit further away, you can now use the flash with the ultra-wide camera, which is something you couldn't do with the Fold 6. The camera bumps also keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger with each new year as well, mainly because the phones keep getting slimmer and there's less and less body to hide the lenses in. And speaking of slimness, this is where you're going to see the biggest difference between these devices because the Fold 7 is outrageously slim. Even next to last year's Fold 6, the difference is insane. This is like a multi-generational jump in thinness. And going back to the Fold 5, the difference is even more dramatic, with the Fold 4 comparison being the biggest difference by a significant margin. And even if you don't end up buying a Fold 7, I highly recommend going to a local store that sells one and just picking one up. It's a really cool device to hold. And as I'm holding this up here, you can see that there's also a significant difference in the width of the devices. Specifically, the Fold 7 screen is both wider and taller than all of the previous generations. And this does make a huge difference for cover screen usability. On the Fold 7, the only time I really open it is if I'm going to be watching videos, I want to have multiple apps open at the same time, or I'm trying to research something on the internet. But all the basic things I do like sending texts, checking emails, and simple internet searches are all done right from the cover screen and I don't feel like I need more space. This was not the case with the Fold 4 or the Fold 5. I would always be opening these up even to send text messages. The Fold 6 had the first screen that was wide enough to more comfortably do things like texting from the cover screen. But if you remember from my review of this phone, I said that I wanted it to be just a little bit wider to be able to text more comfortably, and now we have that. Another huge difference year over year with these devices is the width of the hinge. Each year, Samsung has made this significantly smaller, and this makes it a lot more comfortable to use the phone with one hand. And if we look a bit closer at the corners, you can see that Samsung is really leaning into the squared off design now. Some people love it, some people don't, but it looks like that design is here to stay. And another massive difference with the Fold 7 is that despite having a significantly larger display, it actually weighs way less than the previous generations. In fact, the Fold 7 even weighs less than the Galaxy S25 Ultra by a few grams. And the difference in weight compared to the previous generations of the Folds is very noticeable, especially when comparing to older generations like the Fold 5 or the Fold 4. So if you ever felt like your Fold was just too heavy in the pocket, the Fold 7 really fixes that issue. Something else you'll notice right away if you're someone who doesn't use a case on your phone is that if you tap on the corner, there's a little bit of wobble on the Fold 4 and a little bit more wobble on the 5, a little bit more on the Fold 6, and then a wild amount of wobble on the Fold 7. This thing is super unstable. So if you want to be able to just have your phone down on the table and quickly swipe a text message or something, that's actually going to be pretty hard to do on the Fold 7. Taking a look at the bottom of the Fold 7, we see that we still have a slit design for the speaker, and the same is true for the top speaker as well. Samsung did keep that slit design. They also did move the SIM card up to the top. Previously, it was on the side of the device near the volume rockers. But this slit design for the speaker is different compared to the Fold 5 or the Fold 4. And I'm sure you guys are curious how good these speakers are, being so much smaller than the previous generations, so we'll be testing that in a little bit. Something else I want to quickly point out while we're looking at these is that the Fold 4 had that wedge design where there's this big gap right there. And this made it a whole lot easier for things like dirt, debris, and lint to get on your screen when your phone was just in your pocket. Samsung fixed that issue with the Fold 5, and it's nice to see that trend continue with the Fold 6 and Fold 7. I want to take a second to talk about the hinge quality between these devices, because I noticed some significant changes over the past year with the Fold 6, and I think it's worth pointing out. But starting with the Fold 4, when you try to open this, since the edges are kind of slippery, it's a little bit more difficult to get open compared to the newer versions, and it takes a bit more force to start opening it. And even as I'm going through the motions to open it, this is a stiffer feeling hinge. And when I open it all the way, it doesn't really snap into place. It just kind of stops wherever I stop it. The Fold 5 added this matte finish to the sides, and that actually did help with gripability, making it even easier to open the phone. And the hinge is still kind of stiff, but not quite as stiff as the previous generation. But again, when I get mostly open, it doesn't pop open. I do have to push it all the way open. The Fold 6 was tremendously easy to open, partly because it just takes less force to open it, like the magnets aren't holding it as tightly together. And when you pair that with the flat sides and the matte finish, this is just really easy to open. And when I first got this phone, when I opened it to about here, it would just kind of snap open. But now it doesn't really do that anymore. I have to get it almost all the way open before it'll finish snapping to the full open spot. And so I realized that this is something that degrades over time. And the best way to demonstrate that is to show you how the Fold 7 opens. But first I want to point out that while this does have a mostly matte finish, it's shiny, but it is pretty grippy. Since the edges of the phone are so slim, it is actually harder to open this phone than really any of the previous generations. I wouldn't say that's a reason not to get the phone, but it is something to be aware of and something you might have to get used to. So when I open up this phone, when I get most of the way open, it just kind of snaps open the rest of the way. Just like that. And while this is nice to see, I'm sure it's going to become just like the other hinges over time. For minimum fold angle, which matters for flex window, a feature we'll talk more about in a little bit, the Fold 6, 5, and 4 can stop at pretty much any open angle, but the Fold 7's maximum open angle isn't nearly as low as the rest of them. And that's because it'll just snap open if I go any further than this. The minimum fold angle is pretty much the same across all of these, and this is useful if you have your phone on a desk or a table, and you want to tilt the cover screen up to you for watching a video. Taking a look at the inner displays, the biggest difference you're going to notice immediately is with the crease. So on the Fold 4, the crease is super deep, super noticeable. There's no way you're not going to notice this. On the Fold 5, it got a little bit better, but it's definitely pretty deep, pretty noticeable. The Fold 6 was the first time where we saw a pretty significant upgrade, but after a year of being folded, it's still pretty close to being as bad as the previous generations. Still better, but also still noticeable. And the Fold 7 I've had for a few weeks, and the crease is getting more noticeable, but it's also a bit wider than the previous generations, and this makes the slope less steep and harder to notice. So while this will get a bit worse over time, I don't think it's going to get as bad as any of the previous generations because it is wider. But something really important to point out about the crease is that you never see it when you're looking straight at the phone, and this is true for any of the previous generations. And most of the time when you're using the phone, you're never really going to swipe across the middle anyway. Everything's pretty much done from the edges. Another difference you'll notice right away is the difference in screen size. The Fold 7 is both wider and taller than all of the previous generations. The height difference is marginal, but the width increase will make a noticeable difference when using multiple applications on the screen at the same time. Having two apps side by side on the Fold 7 works perfectly fine, but when you look at those same two apps on the Fold 4, it's just getting more crammed. Now let's take a minute to talk about durability. So one potential issue with foldable phones is that over time, they may not open quite as flat as they used to by default. As you can see here on my Fold 4, there is still a little bit of a V shape there, but if I give it a little push on the back, I can still get it to open all the way flat again. So while this may become an issue over time, each of these phones were used for 1 year, and the problem is pretty minimal for me. Like this one actually still opens pretty much completely flat without having to push it open at all. One important thing for you to know to avoid this issue has to do with this hinge right here. So if you look closely at the hinge, you'll see that there are tiny gaps on either side of the hinge, and that allows the backbone of the phone to slide behind the screen and the back of the phone. But if you had a bunch of dirt on this and then opened it up, that dirt would get into these little crevices here. And over time, that can prevent the phone from opening all the way. So if you're ever in a dusty environment, just make sure you wipe the dust off before opening the Fold, and that'll help mitigate this issue. Samsung did give both the Fold 6 and Fold 7 an IP48 dust and water resistance, so both of these are going to have better dust resistance than any of the previous generations. But an IP4 dust rating is just for dust that's larger than 1 millimeter, so that means it's not going to be helpful for things like sand. So regardless of whether you're getting a Fold 6 or a Fold 7, still be careful with it at the beach. Another durability concern is whether or not the screens are tough enough for day-to-day use, and this being my Fold 4, which was used daily for about a year, has had no issues. If I turn the screen off and I kind of hold that up to the camera, you can see there's no big gashes, big cuts, no significant damage, nothing like that. The screen still works fine. The only issue is that right at the very top, you can kind of see that the screen is just starting to peel up there. And if we look at the bottom, there's a little bit of peeling right there as well, but it's kind of hard to see. And once you turn the screen on, you just don't see any of that peeling. The only other thing with these older folds is that when I open them and you listen carefully, you can hear this kind of bristly sound. And I think that's because inside of this hinge are these little bristles that kind of try to keep the dirt out, and it might just be those making that sound. Now let's talk about the biggest issue with the Fold 7, because the Fold 4, Fold 5, and Fold 6 all supported the S Pen, but the Fold 7 completely drops support. And this is pretty frustrating because the S Pen is incredibly powerful. And I already uploaded a deep dive video showing you guys all that you can do with the S Pen on the Galaxy S25 Ultra. And I'll have a link to that video in the description if you want to see how much is actually missing by going to the Fold 7 versus the previous generations. But I do have a bit of good news because after a ton of research and testing, I was actually able to restore about 90% of the S Pen functionality on the Fold 7 by using this stylus instead, and making a bunch of app and setting changes on the Fold 7 to get those features back. So if you're on the fence with getting the Fold 7 specifically because of the loss of the S Pen functionality, definitely check out my video on restoring a bunch of functionality that's also linked in the description. To compare the display quality, I set all the phones to their max brightness with extra brightness enabled and the same color settings. And with this 4K high dynamic range video playing on all 4 devices, we see that the folds get increasingly brighter with each new year. Even the Fold 7 is brighter than the Fold 6 and with a more vibrant image, despite having the same 2600 nit peak brightness. This means that while the max outdoor brightness may be the same between the Fold 6 and 7, the Fold 7 can get a bit brighter indoors. An odd thing I noticed is that the Fold 6 actually seems less vibrant than the Fold 5. And I did double check the color settings and they are the same. It's also worth pointing out that while the Fold 7 screen is technically the largest, you only get a little bit more height when watching 16:9 aspect ratio videos. But if you expand to full screen mode, the difference in screen sizes becomes substantial, which makes this great for gaming or general productivity. And the hole punch certainly makes itself known here, which, while I love the improved camera quality, perhaps Samsung should have moved the camera up to the corner so that it at least didn't interfere with 16:9 aspect ratio videos, which is most of what you'll see on YouTube. Looking at the cover screens, we get the same results, but the larger screen on the Fold 7 and super slim hinge compared to the Fold 4 and 5 definitely make it a noticeably more immersive display, especially in full screen mode. Taking a look at the max outdoor screen brightness on a 90+ degree day in direct sunlight, we can see the poor thermal performance of the Fold 7 show its face. While it technically started at a similar brightness to the Fold 6, it was the first of all of these devices to dim its screen due to heat after just 2.5 minutes. But even with a dimmed screen, it was still brighter than the Fold 4, which was the second phone to start dimming its screen within about 10 seconds of the Fold 7 dimming. The Fold 6 started to dim next after about 2 minutes and 45 seconds, and the Fold 5 held on till about the 4-minute mark. So if you're looking for the brightest possible screen for short durations on really hot days in direct sunlight, the Fold 6 and 7 will be your best bet. But for a decently bright screen that will stay bright enough for longer, the Fold 5 performed the best. And just to give you an idea of how hot it was, in just 7 minutes, these phones heated up to over 140 degrees. So this is just about the worst case scenario for your phones overheating in the sun. In the shade or on a sub 90 degree day, you'll get far more time at the maximum screen brightnesses. Now it's time for the speed test. I've charged all of these devices up to 100%, and I'm even including the S25 Ultra since this is Samsung's fastest smartphone. And I figured it'd be a good comparison. And if we take a look at the quality settings, you can see that this is the exact same 4K video being exported on every device. So let's go ahead and start the test. And in case you're wondering, I'm using Adobe Premiere Rush to export the videos, and I have the exact same color grading effect applied to each video to make the export a bit more processor intensive. Alright, so the export test finished, and the results are pretty much what we'd expect, except for the fact that the Fold 7 was actually slower than the Fold 6. And I think this just has to do with the fact that the Fold 7 is very thin, so there's not a lot of place for it to dissipate heat. And as any phone heats up, it's going to have to throttle its performance so it doesn't heat up too much. And if we take a quick look at the battery percentages, you can see that they're pretty comparable in how fast they're draining, with the exception of the Fold 4, which is draining a little bit faster. So now let's go ahead and start our next test. And that test is going to be a 3D Mark benchmark to test gaming performance. And I already let all of these devices cool off, so we should see the maximum performance of each device in this test. But don't worry, we'll be testing thermal performance in a minute. So let's go ahead and start the test. And the reason I'm using Wildlife Extreme instead of some of the newer tests is because this is the most intense test that the Fold 4 can run. So here are the results, and they're pretty much what we'd expect with the performance increasing as we get to newer devices. And since this was such a short test, the Fold 7 and the S25 Ultra got pretty much the same score, which does make sense because both of these use the Snapdragon 8 Elite chip. But now we're going to test the thermal performance, and I'm really curious to see how the Fold 7 performs, especially because it's so thin and is less likely to be able to dissipate heat as well as something like the S25 Ultra. So let's back out of here and start the test. And this test is going to loop through the Wildlife Extreme test 20 times in a row. So if there's any thermal throttling, this is going to show us. All right, well, this is pretty much what I was expecting. If you look at the Fold 6's top score versus its lowest score by looping over and over again, and if you follow this chart here, you can see this is the performance degrading over time as it heats up. You can see that the Fold 7 has the largest drop in performance compared to all of the devices. But the good news is that even at its lowest score, it was still a higher score than the lowest score on any of the older devices. And as expected, since the S25 Ultra does dissipate heat better than the Fold 7, its lowest loop score is significantly higher than the Fold 7's lowest score. So the takeaway here is that for short bursts of requiring high performance, the Fold 7 is going to be significantly better than the previous generations. But if you're going to be doing some really processor-intensive gaming for an extended period of time, the performance increase on the Fold 7 isn't going to be quite as much. And taking another look at the battery life across all of the devices, you can see that the Fold 7 is performing marginally better than the other devices, with the Fold 4 starting to trail further behind. Now we're going to test the battery life while watching a movie. And to do this, I've downloaded the same movie to all of these devices, and I've set them all to airplane mode to make sure nothing was going on in the background. And I'm not going to set these to full screen mode because most people aren't going to watch a movie with the sides of the movie cut off. So let's go ahead and start the playback. And I almost forgot to mention that all the devices are set to the exact same brightness level as well. Alright, after an hour and 48 minutes of watching a movie, we can see that the Fold 6, 7, and S25 Ultra had pretty comparable battery drain, and the Fold 4 and 5 had a bit more battery drain than the other three devices. But to test this a bit further, I want to see what happens when we put all the Fold devices to their full screen mode, because that's definitely going to use a lot more power, especially on the Fold 7 since it has such a large display. So let's go ahead and start these again. And we'll expand them. Alright, so it's been about an hour and 20 minutes of watching the movie in full screen mode on all of the devices, except for the Fold 5. For some reason, this just stopped playing the movie right in the middle of it, so disregard this percentage because, as you can see, only a small amount of the movie actually played before it stopped playing. But for the rest of the devices, we did see a bit faster battery drain, but not quite as fast as I was expecting. So here are the battery life results after the video export, the benchmarking, over 3.5 hours of watching a movie, for a total of over 4.5 hours of screen on time. And we can see that the S25 Ultra and Fold 7 are actually pretty comparable in battery life. And the Fold 7 is a little bit better than the Fold 6, noticeably better than the Fold 5, because remember, this has an hour less of movie time, and it still only has the same battery percentage as the Fold 7. So this would likely be in the mid-50s for battery life if it did run for that extra hour. And the Fold 4 comes in last by a pretty significant margin compared to the Fold 7. But regardless, based on that 4.5 hours of screen on time, and in the worst case, the Fold 4 still having 48% of the battery left, it seems that all of these phones should give you all-day battery life and possibly a bit more. And that's certainly been my real-world experience with these devices. To test the charge speed of the devices, I waited till their batteries drained to 2%, then plugged them into a 45 watt capable charger. But since these have a max charge speed of 25 watts, those extra 20 watts didn't make a difference. So after 30 minutes of charging, all the devices have pretty comparable charge speeds, with the Fold 5 pulling a little bit further ahead. And while it did have 3 extra minutes of charging by the time I checked it, its lead is more than what you would have gotten out of those extra 3 minutes. And that can be seen when I checked in at the 1 hour mark. You can see that the Fold 5 is already almost to 100%. And here's the final time when they all reached 100%. As you can see, they're all really similar, so charge speed is definitely not a reason to upgrade to the Fold 7. Now let's do a speaker test between all of these devices. The volume is going to be set to maximum on all of them, and Dolby Atmos is going to be enabled and set to music. And I'll be recording the sound with my Rode NT-G3 microphone placed the exact same distance from all 4 devices. So to my ears, the Fold 5 sounded a bit louder than the Fold 4, but it wasn't quite as full sounding. The Fold 6 was louder than the Fold 5 and also sounded more full, likely thanks to a bit more bass. And while the Fold 7 keeps about the same volume level as the Fold 6, it actually gets a less full sound. And this sort of makes sense because the Fold 7 is so thin. So to my ears, the Fold 6 sounds the best since it has the fullest sound and the highest volume. That is until we compared it to the Galaxy S25 Ultra, which sounds significantly louder and fuller than any of the Folds. But let me know what you guys thought in the comments down below. Now we're going to talk about the camera quality differences between all of these phones, starting with the specs, then jumping into some actual samples. The Fold 4 gets a 12 megapixel 0.6x zoom ultra-wide camera, a 50 megapixel main sensor, a 10 megapixel telephoto camera with a 3x optical zoom and up to a 30x digital zoom. The front camera is a 10 megapixel camera, and the main screen camera is a 4 megapixel under-display camera, which just means it's hidden behind the screen when you're not using it. But as you'll see in a minute, the quality is horrendous. The Fold 4 also introduced 8K video recording at 24 frames per second for the first time on a Samsung foldable device. The Fold 5 has the exact same camera setup as the Fold 4, with the exception of an upgraded 50 megapixel main sensor with better low-light performance. The Fold 5 also gets a bump to 30 frames per second with the 8K video recording. The cover and inner display cameras remain the same 10 and 4 megapixels as the Fold 4. The Fold 6 remains the same as the Fold 5, with the exception of an upgraded 12 megapixel ultra-wide sensor, which should help get better ultra-wide night photos. The Fold 7 gets the most significant camera upgrade since the original Fold was released. We now get a flagship tier 200 megapixel main sensor just like the Galaxy S25 Ultra. And the ultra-wide camera now gets autofocus so we can finally take some incredible macro photos. The telephoto and cover screen cameras remain the same 10 megapixels as all of these previous generations. But the inner display camera has been upgraded from 4 megapixels to 10 megapixels. And while, spoiler alert, the photos and video quality is dramatically better, we do lose the under-display function. This means you'll always see the camera cutout when using the main display. But this has always been the case with any candy bar style phone like the S25 Ultra. So there are the specs, but how do these cameras actually perform? Let's find out. Starting with a high dynamic range test to see how well the phones capture really bright and dark areas at the same time, we get some interesting results. The Fold 4 performs pretty well, capturing a bright swing set without making the skies too bright, but it seems to be a bit over-sharpened. The Fold 5 is a bit too dark, and the Fold 6 and 7 seem pretty comparable. Adding in the S25 Ultra, we see very similar results to the Fold 7, which makes sense because they both have a 200 megapixel sensor. Taking a normal photo with the one-time zoom camera, we see some more obvious differences. The Fold 4 is substantially oversaturated, making the colors more vibrant than they are in real life. The Fold 5 is doing something odd with the sky. I can't quite put my finger on exactly what's wrong, but it's definitely not right. The Fold 6 made the sky a darker blue than it actually was, but the water did look pretty close to real life. And the Fold 7 has the most true-to-life colors in this group of photos. Switching to the 0.6x zoom cameras, we see the same differences in colors, but the oversaturation on the Fold 4 becomes more obvious when we look at the trees and the raft. Punching into 3x zoom to test the telephoto cameras, we can see that the Fold 4 and 5 are a bit oversaturated and oversharpened. There's also a strong blue shift which you can see in the mountains. The Fold 6 and 7 look much more true to life, with the Fold 7 being the most color accurate. Testing out the 10 times zoom camera, we can see that none of these look good. The Fold 4 is still doing the oversaturating and sharpening thing. The Fold 5 and 6 look pretty similar, just with some differences in brightness. And while the Fold 7 looks terrible, there's technically a bit more detail in the chair and flowers, but this is certainly nothing to be excited about, especially when we add the S25 Ultra into the mix. It may not be as bright as the others, but there's a ton more detail in the flowers, the chair, and even the foliage in the background looks more natural. Maxing out the zoom on the Folds to 30 times, you can see that they all start to look like oil paintings. This level of zoom would only be useful for maybe trying to read a sign from far away. The S25 Ultra, on the other hand, still gets a decent photo, even at the 30 times zoom. And this is why I still recommend the S25 Ultra over the Fold 7 if you ever need to take photos at 5 times or longer zoom levels, like when trying to get pictures of your kids playing sports. Now let's take a look at macro photos. You can immediately see that the Fold 7 gets far closer to an object while keeping focus. So if you're a fan of close-up nature photos, the Fold 7 will be a massive upgrade. And comparing it to the S25 Ultra, we see that both photos are actually really closely matched. Taking a look at the 10 megapixel cover screen cameras, we see slight differences in color processing, particularly in the shirt and hat, and the Fold 4 is a bit oversaturated again. Regardless, all these photos are pretty similar, so the cover screen camera definitely won't be a reason to upgrade. If we open up the phones and use the main display camera to take a selfie, we see a huge difference with the Fold 7. And that's thanks to the 10 megapixel hole punch camera versus the 4 megapixel under display cameras on the previous generations. The Fold 4, 5, and 6 all look hazy, especially around the hat, and it honestly looks like the cameras just kept getting worse each year until we got to the Fold 7. But while this is a massive improvement, just remember that it does come at the cost of losing the ability to hide the camera under the display like you could on the Fold 4 through 6. When it comes to capturing extremely dark scenes with night mode, the Fold 7 starts to dominate. At 1 time zoom, the Fold 7 is the only phone that doesn't have horrendous smearing, and it captures more detail in the trees. Backing out to 0.6 times zoom, none of them are really usable, but the Fold 7 is the only phone that at least caught some detail in the swing set. Punching into 2 times zoom, 3 times zoom, and even 9.5 times zoom, we consistently get more detail from the Fold 7. But at these higher zoom levels, we also start to get some purple artifacts. If we add some light to this scene, we start to get some mixed results. At 0.6 times zoom, the Fold 7 has the most accurate colors and the most detail in the dark scene, including the addition of some stars. But at 1 times zoom, the Fold 7 starts to shift a bit purple and loses detail in the stars. At 2 times and 3 times zoom, the Fold 7 has the most detail in the dark areas, but it's still adding in a bit of that purple. At 5 times zoom, the purple tint goes away on the Fold 7, and it keeps that extra detail in the dark areas. Taking a picture of the stars, we can see that all 4 phones look completely different. Even though the sky was black, the Fold 4 and 5 added some blue into it, and the Fold 6 added a bit of red. The Fold 7 was the most true to life here, but the trees weren't as bright as the other Folds, and the colors did lean a bit too green. Aiming the cameras straight up at the stars gave similar results, with the Fold 4, 5, and 6 making the sky far brighter than it actually was, and the Fold 7 was again the most true to life here and had a sharper image of the stars. And compared to the S25 Ultra, the Fold 7 took a very comparable picture. Taking a photo of the moon is where things get really interesting. The Fold 4 seems to capture the sharpest image of the moon, but with a bit too much contrast. And the Fold 5 and 6 did a pretty poor job of getting the correct colors. Now, here's the interesting part. If we compare the Fold 4 and Fold 7 to the S25 Ultra, we can see that they're tremendously similar, despite the S25 Ultra having an objectively better zoom camera. I'm not sure exactly what's going on here, but at least we know we can get decent moon photos. Now let's test how fast each phone can take a picture. So clearly, the Fold 5, 6, and 7 take pictures way faster than the Fold 4, so even if you're going from a 4 to a 5, you are going to notice a big difference there. And yes, you can technically swipe down on the shutter button to take a burst photo for even faster pictures, but sometimes you just need to take a few quick pictures, and the Fold 5, 6, and 7 are going to be much better for that. A big addition to the video capabilities for the Fold 7 is the addition of log video recording. Enabling this mode is going to turn off Samsung's color grading, and it'll let you capture the maximum amount of detail. This will give you a video that looks a bit washed out, but it's actually supposed to be that way. This washed out color is what gives you way more freedom in adjusting the colors on your own. Besides the log video recording option in Pro Video Mode, if we jump back to regular video mode, you'll see that we now get an HDR shortcut. This significantly increases the amount of detail you can get in the bright and dark areas of a video, and makes everything look a lot more vibrant. But unfortunately, because of the limitations of YouTube, I actually can't show you guys a direct side-by-side video between an HDR video and a non-HDR video, at least without messing up the rest of this video, so instead I have to do something a bit different. So here's a sample I made when I did my S25 Ultra review to show you guys the difference between a standard video, which is what you'd get with a Fold 4 through a Fold 6, versus an HDR 10 video, which is what you would get on an S25 Ultra or a Fold 7. And as you can see, it is a massive difference in both brightness and the color accuracy. That said, while there's no HDR shortcut on the Fold 6, 5, or 4, you can still jump into the settings on these devices, then advanced video options, then enable HDR 10 videos here. So while having HDR video on by default on the Fold 7 is pretty cool, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a reason to upgrade. Now let's take a look at the software differences between the devices, and you'll see I've added some cases onto the back of the phones just so they don't wobble around as much. So the first difference is going to be found in the connected devices settings, and you'll see that everything from the Fold 5 to the Fold 7 has this storage share option, whereas the Fold 4 does not get that option. And this is a feature that lets your Samsung TV or your Samsung Galaxy Book directly access the files on your phone. So if you wanted to push photos and videos from your phone onto the TV, you can control all of that directly on the TV. That's a pretty niche thing, but it's not available on the Fold 4. If we back out of this menu and go into the Galaxy AI menu, you'll see that we get mostly the same results at the top, but if we scroll down towards the bottom, you see that both the Fold 4 and the Fold 5 are limited to Photo Assist and Drawing Assist, but the Fold 6 adds Audio Eraser, Photo Ambient Wallpaper, and Health Assist. And the Audio Eraser is the most important one here. And here's some sample footage of how it works on the Galaxy S25 Ultra for reference. If you're watching a video in your gallery app, if you just tap the video, you'll see this AI icon, and if you tap that icon, it'll analyze all the sounds in the video and let you grab individual sounds and drop the volume on those sounds. And this works incredibly well for things like wind noise, nature sounds, and pretty much anything else that it detects. Photo Ambient Wallpaper is a feature that's going to change your lock screen wallpaper based on the time of day and the weather outside. So if it's raining or snowing outside, you're going to see either rain or snow on the wallpaper. And it'll also lighten or darken the wallpaper depending on the time of day. And if there's a subject in your photo, like a person or an animal, the snowflakes will actually fall on the subject. Now Brief is a personalized briefing for your day. If I go back to my home screen and tap my personal Now Brief, you'll see that I get my weather forecast, upcoming events, some news, and options for other things like parking reminders, and a bunch of other related content down below, including some health information. And if you tap the settings gear, then content to include, you can see that there are a bunch of different things that you can include in the briefing. Health Assist gives you personal insights based on your health data, and this is just referring to these insights here that appear at the top of your Samsung Health app. But this is something that's technically already available on the previous devices as well, so I'm not sure why it's not showing up in the settings. If we jump into the advanced features section of the settings, then scroll down a little bit, we'll see one of the most important differences, and it's this Super HDR option that's available on both the Fold 6 and 7. This will display HDR photos in their full quality with the maximum range of brightness levels on the screen. And all of the photos taken with these devices are HDR photos. For reference, here's the exact same photo on all 4 devices, and the difference in brightness and quality of the image is dramatic. And if I pull down my settings here, you can see that these do all have the exact same brightness levels. Flex mode also gets a bit of an update, and this is the mode that appears when you partially fold your phone. You'll see this little icon right here, and if you tap this, it'll bring up flex mode. And if I do this on both phones, you'll see that they look functionally the same, but if you tap these 3 dots in the corner, you get a new option here called Screen Recorder on the Fold 7. And if you tap this, you can have it record only the top part of flex mode. So if I tap Start Recording, you'll see this little blue box appear around the area that's going to be recording. And now if I move this little cursor around and kind of scroll up and down through this, then save the video, I can go into my gallery app. And when I play the video back, you'll see that it's just that top half of the screen that was recorded. So this is a pretty niche feature, but it is there if you need it, and it's only available on the Fold 7. But honestly, Flex Mode is a lot more useful for using your phone like a mini laptop, and you could do this with any previous generation of the Fold. But having that much larger screen on the Fold 7 does make it a lot easier to do this on the Fold 7. Now there's a real important thing to understand with these software differences. For starters, everything before the Fold 7 is still running on One UI 7. So when these all get the update to One UI 8, some of those missing features may be added back in. However, if we look back at the Galaxy AI features, Audio Eraser and Photo Ambient Wallpaper is already available on One UI 7. And even though the Fold 4 and 5 do have One UI 7, those features are missing. So it's possible those two specific features won't make it to these previous devices. And the same is true for the storage share option. That's probably not going to come to the Galaxy Z Fold 4. So while there are some exclusive software features on the Fold 7, it won't really be a reason to upgrade unless the Audio Eraser specifically is something you really want to have. If you haven't figured out which folds are worth upgrading to the Fold 7 yet, let me make it even easier for you. Here's a chart with simplified categories and whether or not each fold is worth the upgrade in that specific category. And a maybe rating just means it might be worth the upgrade depending on your personal needs. So it's up to you to decide which of these categories are important to you. But just keep in mind, regardless of which previous device you're upgrading from, you will lose that S Pen support on the Fold 7. But if that doesn't bother you and you want to get an exclusive bonus discount on the Fold 7, you can use my affiliate links in the description and pinned comment. Not only will you get that limited time bonus discount, but it'll also help support the channel. In fact, I literally wouldn't be able to afford to purchase all of these products and spend over 100 hours producing a video like this without you guys using those links. So I just want to say a massive thanks to everyone who's been using my links throughout the years. And if you're still on the fence with the Fold 7, specifically because of the missing S Pen functionality, then definitely check out this video here where I get about 90% of that functionality back. Or if you've already purchased your Fold 7, you could check out this video here to see the complete setup guide. That's it for this tech episode. Jesus loves you guys, and I'll catch you in the next one.